So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Demy of Demy-Colton. I founded my small little company about 12 years ago, shortly after I ended my career at the Biotech Industry Organization. And I'd like to welcome all of you here to our 12th edition of the Biotech Showcase. It's really kind of hard to believe that it's already been 12 years. My co-hostess over here will go through some of the really kind of astounding numbers that we have for Biotech Showcase. So I will leave that to her. Just a note about the meeting. We established Biotech Showcase at a point in time when JPM had just taken over the H&Q meeting, and we kept hearing year after year when we would come out here while I was at Bio that the smaller biotech companies had no place to go, that they had no longer had a home and no longer felt welcome. And of course, when an organization like JPM takes over a company like H&Q, things change because of their business requirements. So we launched this meeting in literally, I think it was maybe 2 months from the time that we found a location, which frankly I didn't expect that we would, until we actually did our very first biotech showcase. It consisted of 50 private presenting companies, 300 attendees, and as Tina will tell you, those numbers have grown substantially since that time. So I want to welcome you to our very first plenary session of this new year, and indeed this new decade, and where I think all of us are looking forward to the positive changes that we anticipate that will happen in our industry and indeed globally. So last week on January 8th, 215 leaders in our industry penned a commitment to patients and the public. I'd like to just comment or read you a little bit of that statement that was made in Stat News. They wrote that we recognize that this is a pivotal moment in the history of our industry, as well as the dawn of a golden age of medicine. We will soon have the ability to treat and cure diseases that have long been untreatable and incurable. When I joined Bio all those many years ago, cure was not a word that we ever used. And it's wonderful to know that that is making it into our language today. We save, extend, and enhance lives. Our mission is to change the course of each individual's life for the better. To achieve this, we acknowledge that we have a moral obligation to develop the best medicines and ensure that every person who may benefit has access to them. We need to ensure that we act with the highest integrity and corporate responsibility, always putting patients' interests first. I think that's pretty profound, and that's why we're here. I can tell you that as somebody who is not a scientist, who decided by choice to be in this industry, who has basically dedicated my career to creating events and bringing people together that advance the whole biopharma space, that's why I am here. I am so proud to work in an industry where we have so many smart people dedicated to doing good, to curing disease, and to helping patients. And they take great risks in order to do so. And everybody else that's in the space that supports them, all the investors and everybody that makes this ecosystem work. I, for one, am really proud of what you do. And I want to just thank all of you for the work that you do every single day and that you'll continue to do for the years to come. Now, with that said, I'd like to introduce Tina Gunnick. She is the Managing Director, USA of EBD Group, and is my partner, my partner in crime, if you will, with regard to Biotech Showcase. Tina?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, good afternoon, and I just want to echo Sarah's sentiments. It is always so impressive to meet with all of you and discuss all of the advances that you're making, and a true appreciation from everyone on the team for the work that you're doing. And with that, I would just like to introduce myself. I'm Tina Gunnick, Managing Director of EBD Group US, and I'll just tell you a little bit more about what we're doing here this week. By the numbers. So we have over 3,700 attendees registered for Biotech Showcase. We've had a number of on-site walk-ins. I think we'll tip around 3,800 later this week. We have over 1,000 vetted investors, and we have over 412 innovative company presentations, which we're really excited about. We'll provide detailed information about all of the companies in our big company profile book, and you'll notice we provided some copies on site, but this year we've also made a digital copy of the book available online, and you'll find a link for that inside the front cover of the conference guide. And if you are less tech savvy, as I am, I didn't realize that you can actually just hold your phone camera over the QR code. You don't need an app, and you can download the entire book that way and have it with you on the go, so that's really handy. We've tweaked a few other things with a focus on making the event more sustainable this year. So you'll notice we made the partnering system more mobile friendly. We've done away with disposable coffee cups and just generally looking at reducing our waste. So thanks for your support in those efforts. Now on to the event. In addition to the presentations, we've curated a panel of programs and workshops that started yesterday with our China Showcase, which I saw a number of you at. And we'll end on Wednesday with the media roundup. We have therapeutic-focused area sessions on NASH, women's health, cell and gene, and rare diseases, with analysts and investors participating in each of these sessions. At the Park 55, the Digital Medicine and MedTech Showcase is kicking off this afternoon with our first panel focused on AI, and that's included in your registration, so be sure to stop by and check it out. We also have over 8,000 meetings scheduled in our partnering system, which is a new record, and it's exciting to see all the deal-making activity happening. We've come a long way over these many years, and we've run this meeting, and collaboration has been a key to our success. Collaboration with our sponsors, with our supporters, with media organizations, and of course the strong collaboration among our two organizations, EBD Group and Demy-Colton. With that, I'd like to hand it back over to Sarah into this impressive plenary session, and looking forward to hearing the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking through the slides of our sponsors, big hands off to all the sponsors that have made a commitment to this space to support innovative companies. You guys are really, really important in making this work. So today's plenary session is called The Upcoming Election and Its Potential Impact on the Biopharma Industry. And I think all of us can anticipate that this coming year will have a big impact on our industry, especially with all the machinations taking place in Washington, D.C. The moderator of this event is Ivan Zapian. He's a partner at Hogan Lovells. And I just went to the website and copied a few things down about you, Ivan. And one of them is that he's well known in every facet of government relations community in Washington, D.C., from politics and Capitol Hill to corporate America. He's worked on both sides of the aisle, and I think he will bring great insight to this. But on a personal note, I do want to say that Jeremy Levin is the fellow who convinced me a few years ago, when we were both younger and he had hair, to actually go and work for the biotech industry. We were just talking, and I was a young woman trying to find my way in the world. And so for that, Jeremy, I have to say thank you. I've known most of you up here for a long, long time, but Jeremy, you helped me get on a pathway that I think is really critical for my life and what I want to do. So thank you for that. So Ivan, if I can turn it over to you to introduce the plenary session and to invite your panelists to introduce themselves. We're looking forward to a very lively discussion.
Perfect. Well, first of all, it's a privilege to be here with all of you. As was said, my name's Ivan Zapian. I am a partner with the law firm of Hogan & Lovells. I sit in the regulatory practice, and I focus on government relations. I am a proud member of the much maligned swamp in Washington, D.C. I've been in Washington, D.C. for over 2 decades. I've held jobs as a chief of staff in the Senate, a chief of staff in the House, headed up a corporate office, and in various law firms. So I'm very excited about this panel because I think as you think about the upcoming elections, there's really no time like now to start thinking about the potential changes, the potential opportunities, and the potential challenges down the road as an industry. So we have a very diverse panel that is going to introduce themselves as we answer questions and hopefully have a lively discussion where we will very civilly disagree with each other so that we can provide some entertainment.
There will be disagreement.
Hopefully. We're going to try and make this lively. So to level set, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim to give us a state of the industry and kick us off with some thoughts and some insights into what we are. But to level set, in thinking about the elections, I'm not going to bury the headline. We actually don't have a clue what's going to happen. I think Donald Trump taught us in this last election cycle that everything we thought we knew about politics is out the window. So, we're going into a very interesting time, into very uncharted territory in many ways, and it's a very exciting time. However, we do have some things that we can at least organize our thoughts around. First, Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. He's going to have everything he needs to be a formidable contender. Second, I'm pretty sure that the Democrats will eventually, at some point, I had to qualify that, will have a Democratic nominee. Who that nominee is going to be, he or she, will probably be on that stage tonight. So you look at the stage and you'll probably see somebody that could be a contender. I would probably also add Mike Bloomberg as a potential nominee. I think that one of the things that you're seeing among the Democratic primary movement is that we're in it for the long haul. I'm a Democrat, so take everything I say with a grain of salt if you're a Republican. But I think Democrats are poised to have a primary that is going to go well into the spring, probably close up to the election. But eventually they're going to have a candidate. And eventually we'll be able to figure out exactly what's going to happen in the 4 or 5 states that will make up this election and the 10 to 12 counties within each one of those states that will elect the next president of the United States. So it's a little too early, it's a little too early to tell what's going to happen in the presidential, but we've got some things to think about. I think if you think about the House of Representatives, Speaker Pelosi is likely to keep her gavel. I think Republicans will have a difficult time picking up enough seats in suburban America with Donald Trump at the helm. So she's likely to stay. And Mitch McConnell's likely to remain the majority leader in the Senate. So again, I say that just because there's a lot of talking heads and a lot of people like myself who do this for a living, that we have to sound like we know what we're talking about. But the reality is that it's really hard in uncharted waters. So what a better discussion to have, given that context, than where our industry is, where it's going, and some of the challenges and opportunities that may lay ahead. So Jim, why don't you kick us off with some thoughts?
Because we haven't introduced ourselves yet?
Yes, you got to introduce yourself.
Do you want to do it that way? Okay.
Yeah. Why don't we introduce ourselves as we talk?
So I'm Jim Greenwood. I'm the president and CEO of Bio. I'm a former social worker, turned state rep, turned state senator, elected to Congress 1992. Left there after 12 years, undefeated and unindicted. So that just harder than you might think to come to Bio, and I've loved every minute of the last 15 years. So I think if your assumptions are right, which are that the House is going to remain Democrat and the Senate is likely to remain Republican, then it will, regardless of who wins the presidential election, it will probably still be the Republican majority in the Senate that protects our industry from the most horrible of the proposals out there. And I like to say that this is sort of Dickinsonian, the best of times and the worst of times. The science is galloping. We've never been able to provide this much hope to patients with gene therapy and cell therapy and immunotherapy and gene editing and CRISPR and all of that. At the same time, this is the worst political dilemma the industry has ever faced, and it is really dire. It's quite dire out there. So with the president advocating for international price indexing, the House bill containing an even more drastic version of international price indexing that would apply to the entire industry, not only government programs, but commercial, and a host of other proposals, they are the backstop for now. Now, in the presidential election, although you said that nobody knows what's going to happen, I do. I predicted that Trump would be president, and I predicted that in, I think, the March of 2016. So I got lucky. But I think that Biden will regardless of what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire, where it'll be very, very close, I think that Biden then takes the lead and stays ahead throughout the rest of the campaign and becomes the nominee. And I think he has a pretty good chance of becoming the next president because Trump has shown no inclination or capability of expanding his base. And when you don't expand your base after 4 years, there has to be some attrition from your base. And so I think that if I had to bet money on it, I would bet that Biden will be the next president. The worst case scenario would be Bernie Sanders as president, because if you look at his website, he doesn't talk about just legislating in ways that are counter to our interests. His website talks about defeating the pharmaceutical industry. So he demonstrates absolutely no apparent respect for what we do, no little, if any, understanding of how we operate and why it is that we lead the world in biopharmaceutical innovation because of our free market system. As bad as Donald Trump is for our industry, and he is terrible in his thoughts about our industry and his treatment, his proposals and his treatment of our industry, he has put in place Alex Azar, former Lilly guy and was on my board, and in the White House in charge of pharmaceutical policies, Joe Grogan from Gilead. These are people who at least understand our industry, and although pressured to do things I think they don't want to do by the president, have the capability of at least trying to put some downward pressure on some of his worst impulses. We would not expect that from a Sanders or a Warren presidency. I think that clearly Biden and Buttigieg would be more moderate on these issues. But I think the good news is, in my view, that the worst case scenarios, and it is of course incredibly ironic that Elizabeth Warren representing, when I'm in San Francisco, I don't usually say that Boston is the #1 biohub in the world, but
Thank you.
But it's one of them, and the fact that Elizabeth Warren represents that district and is so threatening to our industry is quite ironic. So that's probably enough for now.
So why don't we go down to Camille? Camille, if you could introduce yourself and just
Sure.
give us some opening thoughts.
Sure. I'm Cammie Samuels. I'm a partner at Venrock. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Venrock's a venture capital firm that's been around for 50 years. We were originally established as the venture arm of the Rockefeller family. And this morning we announced that I am no longer the only female partner. My partner, Raquel Bracken, has become a partner at the firm, and she's also half Korean American, so she's busted through a glass ceiling and a bamboo ceiling, and so I'm thrilled about that. On this topic, I see myself as sort of the translator between what you hear from the sage people on the panel in terms of the implications for all of us, because most of the folks in this audience are less on the policy side and more on the practical, what are we going to do about it side. And I invite all of us to think about what if pricing in oncology or in orphan disease became like pricing in antibiotics. It's hard to think about. I do also have one question for Jim. In the unlikely event that you're wrong and a newly reascendant Trump wins, could we count on McConnell blocking Trump's instincts?
Well, I actually think that that Trump as a lame duck president would no longer have the need to seek votes by attacking us. So he could very well, if he were reelected, which I am not advocating, he could very well turn his attention to something else like making war in the Middle East. But might, I think there's actually a scenario in which he would lay office a bit. But I do think that McConnell has fundamental beliefs in that he doesn't believe in price controls. And this is true of the Republican caucus in general. Doesn't believe in price controls, and doesn't think that international price indexing is good. Understands that, and respects free enterprise. So I do think that again, not that I am the last living moderate Republican, not to share many of McConnell's views, but I do think that is our best stopgap right now.
Jeremy?
Hello, my name is Jeremy Levin, and this is a really interesting topic. My current role is as chairman of Bio, so I have the great pleasure of working closely with Jim, representing many of you, and thank you for your support on the board. It's really important, and hopefully you'll continue to do that as we go through this rather stormy period. My other role is 4 years ago, I stepped off running the largest generic company in the world with over $20 billion of sales. And since that time, I've devoted myself utterly to building a rare disease company called Ovid. And in that company, I'm focused on neurodevelopment, an area that nobody was in, but now we're actually hopefully have our pivotal trials this year. So I'm learning to go back out as a small company CEO. It's been very tough. My background prior to that actually speaks to something different and speaks to today. Hands up those of you who've ever lived in a dictatorship.
Not counting the present one.
I didn't say that. Hands up those of you who've ever lived in a country where democracy was never part of the nature of that country. Okay, my point about my perspective on what we're facing today in our industry and how that relates to our democracy is it didn't just arrive this year. We've been doing something wrong for years. This democracy, and then any kind of government that you have, is actually enabled by the behavior of its people. And if you allow things to happen, then they do. And bad things happen more often than good things, to be perfectly honest. At least that's my unpleasant experience. America is profoundly, utterly, totally privileged. Each one of you in this room, each one of the people out there take democracy for granted. That's rubbish. That is rubbish. Democracy requires participation, requires hard work. It requires that each one of us sit down, think about what we're contributing to our society, consider the implications of our acts, and act on those. If we do not do that, we end in a mess. And that's where our industry is. Our industry is in a mess today because 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we allowed a whole set of executives to walk in and to start in a way which is quite remarkable, in an unbridled fashion, to exploit the American economy. And why is it that, how dare they suddenly consider that every single one of them should be compensated automatically for raising a price? How many of you would consider having a little Volkswagen Beetle, which last year might cost you $10,000, same model this year costing you $10,000, $11,000, and next year $12,000? Would you ever do that? Nonsense, that's a stupid business model. But that's what the structure of compensation has done in our industry. In the meantime, you have incredible entrepreneurs financed by just an amazing capital market, great sources of innovation and venture capital, and they're generating technologies which are quite remarkable. And yet, we're now harvesting the bad behavior, and the results of that bad behavior of over 25 and 30 years of the industry. The consequence of that are this year. Every single politician, every single policymaker feels that it is their right, their ability to take the anger that is bubbling out around outside here and attack the industry. I'd do the same if I was their kind of a politician. I'm not. But that said, I want to go back to what I said. All of our democratic processes come from a behavior that we allow to happen. We've allowed ourselves to get to this point. We have allowed ourselves to get to this point, and we need to make a change. We need to articulate who we are. We need to articulate, not in the policy worlds, that I leave to Jim. Jim does this better than anybody else in the world. He understands exactly how you talk to the political cadre. We need to talk to the kids in the street. We need to tell them to vote. We need to tell them what we're doing. We need to talk to the schools. We need to talk to every single individual that is out there that will hear what we are doing. If we do not do that, this industry will be attacked consistently. It will be dependent on the question, will Mitch McConnell stop what might happen? Will President Trump do this? That's not the point. We've allowed those guys to get into power and to behave the way we have, and I think that's unconscionable. We should not allow ourselves to give up the battle for the hearts and minds of America, to allow these kinds of trivial thinking to harm the industry, which is so fantastic. So I come from a position of, I've lived where bad democracies exist. I've lived with dictators. I've fought a couple wars. And oh, by the way, I am a farmer. I am a gun owner. I'm a Democrat. I don't know what that means any longer. And I'm a fiscal conservative, and I'm a social liberal. So where do I fit, guys? I know one thing. I fit with values that I absolutely believe in. Absolutely believe in. I can talk to the most radical right-wing person and the most radical left-wing person. I can work with them. We've all got to work together. And if we don't do that, if we don't dream, if we don't work together, we're in trouble.
I feel like we should clap for that. That was really well done. Really well done. Yeah. So yeah, we'll have the board president
Vote,
meeting
Jeremy.
outside. Yes, we'll start it. So Julie?
Well, that's kind of a tough act to follow. So I'm Julie Gerberding. I am an executive vice president at Merck and the chief patient officer. I have responsibility there for policy and communications and a few other things. But I'm also home. I'm on the faculty here at UCSF, and I kind of have a checkered career that probably has one consistent theme, and that is that I really strongly believe in access to medicines and access to better health. I was on the faculty at UCSF and worked most of my tenured career at San Francisco General Hospital, which is kind of the hospital of last resort here. So I know from the bedside what happens when people can't get medicines and vaccines. I also directed the US CDC for a number of years and kind of saw access on a global basis, and ended up going to the pharmaceutical industry because Ken Frazier wanted to globalize the vaccine business and bring vaccines to the people who really needed them the most, and that was a kind of an offer I couldn't refuse. So where I'm sitting right now today, looking at this political situation here in the US, but it's being played out in every single other important market that we operate in, I agree with the spirit of Jeremy's remarks that we have to change ourselves. And we really have to go back to putting patients and the affordability of medicines front and center in our agenda. We can spend a lot of time pointing our fingers at the other part of the health system that's more to blame for the rising costs, et cetera, but at a time when we hold the solution to the cost of medicine in our own hands, the cost of health is increasing, and prevention, treatment, and cure is the best way to lower the cost of health care. And we have the science and the technical capability to really do that in ways that we couldn't have even imagined 10 years ago. But shame on us if we don't figure out how to bring those inventions to people in a way that they can afford out of pocket, but also that governments can afford in order to keep their own fiscal responsibility intact. So I agree this is a robust platform for conversation. I hope we have some debate, but I'm going to put my stake in the ground on trying to focus on what we can do to help patients afford their medicines and have access to them wherever they are. Thank you.
No pressure, but the last two speakers got clapped for, so.
No, thank you so much. And first of all, my name is Ruud Dobbe. I'm leading the global business, biopharmaceutical business on behalf of AstraZeneca. And I feel very privileged because I've worked in many places around the world, not in a dictatorship, but whether it is in Asia, whether it is in Europe, Middle East. And I've seen many, many healthcare systems around the world. And yes, there is a tension here in the United States of what is going on. We are seen as the bad apple, and it hurts my heart every time when I hear politicians talking about us as something very ugly and not good. Equally, I can only echo some of the words of my panelists that there are solutions, and I think innovation is something what is bringing us all together. The unmet medical need for many diseases is still huge, and I think all together we need to do a much better job in order to show the innovation to the societies we are serving. It's easy to say, difficult to execute, but I'm a firm believer that if we go through this very turbulent period now in the United States, the good news is that every politician is talking about healthcare, and it hits your heart, it hits your mind, and I think although it's difficult, it's a good starting point in order to further intensify the dialogue in order to come to solutions. And I fully agree with Julie that we need to stop finger pointing to each other. Let's find a constructive dialogue in order to get out of this very difficult situation. And as a company and as an individual, I'm very committed in order to do my best in order to achieve that.
So it sounds like, first of all, thank you all. These were insightful, great remarks. It sounds like everyone's in agreement that there's going to be some turbulence for the rest of the year. And within that turbulence, there is going to be some unfounded and negative rhetoric towards the industry. So I guess my question for the panel is, leaving aside the issue of how to address it, what do you think the lasting impact will be 2020 and beyond to have all of the media attention driven towards the industry?
Well, I'll take that.
Okay.
But I'm sorry.
I'm not a shrinking violet. I'll get in, Jim.
And I'm not a male firster, so I'm happy to yield.
So one of the things I was going to build on is our last two panelists' remarks on access and cost, and then quality. And in the U.S. healthcare system, in any healthcare system, at any moment, there's a tension between those three things: access, everybody getting access to care, cost, and quality. And we, as an industry, have taken advantage, we've taken advantage of a long economic bull market, as well as some amazing innovations, as have been described from CAR-T to CRISPR and gene therapy and so on. And we're kind of been hiding behind the innovation thing. And I do worry that right now, I think the world is telling us that it cares more about access and cost. And if we don't take leadership relative to, that's the prioritization that certainly our country is telling us it cares about. We can't. I don't think we'll be able to hide behind innovation. And I'm someone who invests in innovation every day, and it's what gets me out of bed in the morning. But I do worry that we've been hiding behind it.
So your question was, regardless of what happens now, what's the long-term view? But I want to step back from that because I think there is something that could happen this year. It's maybe less than a 50-50 chance, but let me give you sort of my diagnosis. despite the fact that what you hear constantly from the media and the politicians is the word skyrocketing drug prices, we all know if you look at the data, in the last year, the net price of drugs went down 3.1%. And so drug prices have not been skyrocketing. There have been bad examples of too much price increases, but that's not what we're experiencing. That's not what the patients are experiencing. What they're experiencing is high out-of-pocket costs. Half of the people in this country who have employer-provided health care are in high deductible plans. And they tend to encounter those deductibles at the drugstore. Most of us don't wind up in a hospital in any given year, but most of us end up at the drugstore. So when you have to go and you have to pay full price for the drug because you haven't hit your deductible yet, you're angry. And your employer's not in the room, and the insurer's not in the room, the drug is in the room, and the anger is directed at us. If you look at the Medicare Part D program, 45 million beneficiaries, 1 million of them every year pay more than $3,000 out of pocket, and many pay $5,000, $7,000, $9,000, $12,000 and up. And that is morally wrong. No one who paid into Medicare all of their lives, now living on fixed and limited income, should be faced with that kind of cost. So we at Bio have taken the lead and said we want Congress to pass an out-of-pocket cap for the Medicare program. That's to begin with. We need to get it into the commercial market, but first we need to cap the out-of-pocket at about $200 a month. And the good news is, as horrible as what H.R. 3 contains coming out of the House, it does have a very good out-of-pocket cap. The Senate Finance Bill has an out-of-pocket cap. And among President Trump's many mostly horrific proposals, he does support, his administration supports, an out-of-pocket cap. So what happened in December was the Congress came to an agreement on spending for the year, except for the fact that while they repealed the Cadillac tax on high-price health policies, and they repealed the medical device tax, they didn't pay for them. So they have to go back and find the pay-fors for them, and they put that off until May. So they're going to be coming toward us and the other healthcare providers to help pay for all of that. And that means there's an opportunity to seize on this out-of-pocket cap. It'll save the Treasury money. It will save the patients something like $32 billion over 10 years. So if we can get that done, I think we can lower the temperature, and finally members of Congress and the President will have something to be able to brag about politically to their constituents, and that could spell the beginning of the lowering of the political pressure on our industry.
So, Ivan, you asked a question. I want to come back to what you talked about as well, but the question was, what is the lasting effect? The lasting effect is dependent also on whether or not we take any actions this year. German Bio will continue on out-of-pocket. Hopefully we'll have this discussion around the cap. But I think much more importantly for the audience, I would challenge you to take advantage of what looks like an unbelievable wave of negativism. And that's the moment to go back. That's the moment where every single newspaper is talking about us. That's the moment where every single TV station is taking shots at us. And that's the moment where, in fact, people will hear something different if we do it right. So we wrote a letter. That letter comes out of a speech that I gave in June. That letter was signed by some 215, but that's the beginning. The object behind that letter was not the 215, not just the statement. It was to galvanize and to show to everybody that it's okay to stand up and say, this is what I believe in. My challenge to everybody in this room is, number one, and I'll provide that to Sarah, sign on. Talk to every single individual within your organizations. We will continue behind this. There are CEOs who've offered millions of dollars to set up an organization to send out the positive stories that we have, that we can enable you to do that. Ivan, why is that important? Because during this period of time, if we sit there, you have to do something concrete. Jim's going to do that with out-of-pocket. If we do that, that'll be fantastic. But at the same time, we've got to go for the hearts and minds of the populace. If we do not do that, the overriding message that we'll exit this year with has been that is the bad guys, And oh, by the way, how many of you know that the end of last year, Gallup poll ranked us the least respected industry in the country, below tobacco, below lawyers, below government, below anything else that you don't know. I like lawyers. My daughter's a lawyer. And there you go. Yeah. So realistically, this is an astonishing position to be in. We need to climb out of that hole. So if we let this year go by without doing anything, shame on us. And I'd like you please to sign on. Sarah will have the way to do this.
Sign-up sheets on the way out.
So I think one of the most common and used rules in politics is that the second you're explaining, you're losing, right? So I think, for the industry to get ahead, you have to start telling your story. So I think that's a great point. Julie, anything to add?
I think we all recognize that the story is not out. The challenge that I have, and probably everyone in the room faces, is that our story is not a soundbite. The economy of health is challenging, and so you can't really explain all of the dilemmas because the health policies involved are misaligned and complex, and if we could simplify things, we would be in great shape. But having said that, I also think that the patients themselves are really our best storytellers. I just can't imagine any more powerful messenger than the people who are benefiting from the new inventions that we're putting out. And when they go and talk to Congress or sit down and talk with individual leaders or decision makers, they are really incredibly potent and relevant storytellers. And I chair for Bio the patient engagement subcommittee with Paul Hastings, and when we sit in our rooms and really listen to the patient advocates and what they need and what they want, there's incredible alignment. So if you think about it, they want the same thing we want. They want faster access to affordable drugs that solve unmet medical needs, and that's almost 100% alignment. So we need to really first and foremost, listen to them because they're the reason we're in business in the first place. And second, understand if we make a policy that meets their needs, we will have a policy that I believe can pass Congress.
Can I jump in there? Sorry, Ruud, I will give you your chance.
That's fine.
But I will tell you, one of the most maligned drugs right now is Zolgensma for the $2.1 million cost. And my partner, Bon Ko, served on the board at Avexis. And under the Avexis leadership, there was this side-by-side videos, one of a baby on the typical course with SMA, where lifespan for that child was 14 months of age. And next to it was a video of Matteo. And I remember his name, and I saw the video twice, not a dry eye in the room. And Matteo got the gene therapy at birth because his brother had died of the disease. And there he is at 3.5, walking with his Spider-Man backpack. And there's literally, all of us are weeping. I'm one of the only people that admits to having wept at the video, but we're all weeping. And has anyone reading, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, heard anything about how powerful and important that drug is? It's just amazing to me that we're letting someone else tell our story.
Ruud, anything there?
No, the only piece I would like to add, I fully agree with Julie that patient advocacy and engagement is crucial. But equally, there's an obligation for the whole industry to have an aligned position. And what I see, not only here in the United States, but across the world, is for good reasons or bad reasons, companies have different reads on issues. So when you are in front of politicians, it's very, very difficult in order to have a consolidated view. I think we all agree that medicines are a phenomenal way in order to reduce the total cost of care. But equally, the level of skepticism and bad actors also in our industry are not helping the story. And I think we need to be a bit more forceful as an innovative industry in order to call out if companies are not behaving well, because that sets the trend for the whole industry. And hopefully, moving into 2020, we are doing a much better job in order to make that clear.
That's a fantastic comment. I think calling out bad actors is really critical We're pretty shy about doing it. We don't like doing it. We don't often do it, and we sure as heck should be doing it. But there's something else I'd like to urge that we really start to think about. If you are compensated as a senior executive in a pharmaceutical company, and particularly the CEOs, as I was, you're never compensated for innovation. Never. You're compensated for top line, bottom line. And oh, by the way, I can increase my top line at the end of the third quarter by increasing prices. And oh, by the way, I can increase my bottom line by simply buying back my stock. Now, if you leave those intrinsic levers in place, there is zero incentive to change the behavior of senior management teams. And indeed, the incredible R&D that we see in pharmaceutical and biotech, and don't get me wrong, in pharmaceutical and biotech, fantastic innovation going on in the labs, necessarily will never see the light of day, because what happens, and I've been a commercial guy, is you get told to hit your sales targets, and by the way, there's that little lever that you just pulled because you just didn't quite make it. You need to get compensation changed. Compensation should be aligned with innovation and patience. And if we do not do that, the chances of change in the industry broadly are extremely limited. So I would go one step further, not just calling out bad actors. I think the boards, compensation committees of all of these companies, whether they be biotech or otherwise, need to think very carefully about how do you change incentives to launching new drugs, getting greater innovation, supporting patients. It's very tough to do, but by God, we should be doing it.
If I can just add to that, I don't think it's accurate to say that all companies, the company I work for, and I'm a member of the senior management team, has a very heavy weight on the progression of the R&D pipeline. And that's something that we track regularly, and it is very much a part of our compensation and our incentive planning. So, you know, we have to be careful not to put everybody in the same bucket. Of course, Merck is a very R&D intense company. It makes sense that we would have that in our approach, but I agree with the principle that compensation and incentives need to align with the broader view of what we're trying to accomplish, and we are about invention.
So I'm not going to disagree with Jeremy, because I do think there are three things that people don't like about our industry. Launch price, the constant increases in pricing, and out-of-pocket costs. But the point I keep making is we can tell our story beautifully. But when you walk into a drugstore and hand your kid's script to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist said it'll be $900, and you don't have $900, you don't care whether prices are going up or down, what the CEOs are getting paid, whether we're 14% of the spending or 50% of the spending, how good we are at innovating new drugs that make people weep with the benefits. You don't care about that. You care that I can't get my kid's medicine, or if I do, I can't afford other things that I need. So this out-of-pocket thing is absolutely critical, and it needs to be extended to the marketplace. If you twist your ankle and you need an X-ray, and you have to decide, should I call an ambulance to take me to the ER? If I have a high deductible, I'm probably not going to do that. Or do I ask my neighbor to take me to an urgent care center? Skin in the game makes sense there. Skin in the name never has and never will make any sense when it comes to prescription drugs, because nobody's taken a second handful of chemotherapy because it's free, right? So all that skin in the game does when it comes to prescription drugs is destroy adherence, which makes people sicker, which sends them into hospital, which costs more money. And I think Congress should have not only fixed that out-of-pocket problem in Medicare, but it should legislate to insurance companies, you can sell policies that have high deductibles, but there has to be a limit on the deductibility of prescription drug costs, because they're a different kind of expense. You don't have any choice or discretion when it comes to the drugs that you take.
So we're going to reserve the last little bit for questions from the audience. So there are two mics up here, and there's a roving mic over here. So if you could just introduce yourself and fire away.
So, and the one thing I'd like to ask everybody who's asking a question, please be as brief as you possibly can be. So, with that said, please ask away.
And there needs to be a question mark at the end of your question.
Jim, a very good point.
My name is Robert Brooks. I was waiting for a little more lively debate, meaning that there would be both the Democrat and Republican side on the conversation. I only see more one side here.
I'm the Republican.
No, I don't think so, Jim.
He's a never Trumper Republican.
He's a never Trumper. Never Trumper. So to
since
you,
since you'd like to see some sparks, the Republican Party is gone.
no, I don't think
Yeah.
so. I don't think so. So maybe as a supporter of the president, but I think this idea. I agree with you that the socialist agenda of Sanders and Warren would be very bad.
Yes,
But
yes, do
my
make a-
question
ask
to
a
you,
question.
my question to Jim, okay, is I don't see Biden as a moderate when they asked, do you agree with Medicare for all? And he raised his hand, yes.
What's
So
the
that's
question?
My question. My question, do you?
Right. So I think that's the greatest Achilles heel that the Democrats have. And I watched that moment and I cringed when Biden put his hand up because I think that, and he's backed away from that. He's now talking about Medicare for those who want it. So Biden's position now is if you want to buy into the Medicare program, you can buy in, and if you can't afford it, we'll subsidize you. But I do think for the Democrats to run on a platform that says we're going, whether you have fabulous Cadillac health insurance from your employer or from the labor union, we're going to take it away from you, and we're going to give you put you on a government program, and we're going to see how that goes and what it costs. And by the way, while we're spending ridiculous amounts of money on everything else, you can expect that the Medicare program will become diminished over time. So I do think that's a terrible policy. And I do think that whoever the Democratic nominee is needs to figure out how to walk away from that. And there's no way Sanders or Warren can do that.
So just to add on that, I think not only is it a terrible policy, it's also terrible politics. So whoever the nominee is going to have to back away from it because in the general election, it's just so unpopular.
Right, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful about language. Language is important. A socialist agenda, bullshit. We'll see socialism. I can show you exactly the country that's got socialism. We don't have it even close in this country. We have fascists, we have communists. We know them. None of us like them. They both are really bad. But to bring into our dialogue that there's a socialist agenda is rubbish. Absolute rubbish. We don't have anything remotely like that. If you're talking about socialized medicine, where in fact you're trying to get medicine to everybody, that's a reasonable debate. But we don't have socialism. And this country will never have socialism. It cannot be structured that way. So I think one has to be very cautious about that. And the concept that we have suddenly left and right, I don't know, I've lived in a left-wing environment. I've lived in a right-wing environment. The question isn't that. Our debate can't be rested on rhetoric. We have to debate substance. Because if we do not debate substance and we label people, you depersonalize people, you suddenly start doing what fascists did in the 1930s. That's what the fascists and the communists did. They depersonalized people. They depersonalized political process. Cannot do that, Sarah. So if you want controversy, come with me on that one.
Okay, next question, gentlemen.
John Weston. I'm a veteran of big pharma and small startup biotech. And one observation is the bigger you get, the less you care about your customers, about your patients, et cetera, really, because you're insulated, whether it's big finance, big banking, big cars, big pharma. Do we need a Teddy Roosevelt moment with trust busters to say, we don't need mega mergers between huge companies becoming even bigger dumb companies. Maybe we need to break it up into smaller companies that are more nimble, more dependent on their customers and patients to be responsive to what's going on. That's a more natural solution. What are your thoughts on that and the ability to do that from the government down or whatever?
So Ruud and Julie.
In the spirit of constructive feedback, I'm working in this company for 22 years, and I do not recognize in any way or form what you're saying, that big means that you don't have a customer-patient orientation. I'm working in a company with 17,000 employees, and day in, day out, I see people incredibly motivated of what they do, whether it is from a research perspective as well as from a commercial perspective, to make an impact on patient lives. So I don't think that size in itself is the issue we need to solve. I think what the issue is, what we need to solve is, what can we do more clearer to the society about the value of this great industry? And it is fantastic if smaller companies can do it, but equally it's fantastic that big companies are able to do that. So I don't see that as an issue at all.
I'm sure Julie might have
Yeah,
something to say.
I'm just sitting here thinking about Ebola vaccine, which is something that Merck, as well as J&J and GSK, worked hard on without profit. And the number of employees and the number of person hours that have gone into accelerating progress in that vaccine and ultimately getting it approved, but more importantly, getting it to the DRC and trying to support the utilization of it in one of the worst environments in the world, to the extent where we had to invent drone capability for delivery. That's about people who care deeply for health, and I don't think that the fact that Merck is a big company has anything to do with the passion and purpose of the people who work there.
Thank you.
Hi,
Jen-
Michael Fitzhugh, news editor for BioWorld. I'm hearing tremendous passion and real urging for action in the rhetoric in the things that you've said today, Jeremy. But I've really only heard about concrete steps in the things that Jim talked about with out-of-pocket costs. Can you talk to me about the concrete steps that we need to take in industry in the year ahead? You mentioned maybe even forming another group to get your message out. I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, it's not just to be very cautious. The efforts that Bio have done are remarkable. There's a set of very defined, specific legislative steps that are being managed through the process that Jim has put in place in Bio. These steps are highly concrete. They talk about going to the hill. What I talked about was something slightly different. I think a very concrete set of steps need to be taken to go back to the basic ground level of individuals in this country to teach them. That's not necessarily just the role of an industry organization. It is also the role of every single CEO
In the
every single
media.
state, and the media.
Storytelling was one of the solutions proposed, and the media can help with that.
So I do believe that we do need to do a hearts and minds campaign, but at the same time, that is not, don't mistake that for being not concrete. Reality is perception. Right now, the perception is that we're for crap. You know that. And that allows every politician to do exactly what they want to do. And Jim has to fight 5 times harder to get the out-of-pocket because nobody opens the door to us. Because they already feel, why should they bother? Their electorate don't like us. We've got to get to the electorate. So I believe that's highly concrete, and there will be steps that we'll roll out with hopefully the support of many of the individual companies. At the same time, Bio is the sharp point of getting to the hill and making things change there.
Our next question.
Yes, my name is Jim Manuso. I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor at this point, involved in a number of companies. And my question has to do with the basis of the evolution of our country, which is liberty, freedom of choice, and what can be done to align freedom of choice in connection with the FDA and more rapid approvals of medicines, giving people the right to take what they want.
Well, it depends what you mean by that. What I would consider to be the radical position on that is articulated by those who say that the FDA should be in charge of safety but not efficacy. I think that's ridiculous. We don't want to have snake oil for sale in this country, and neither do the companies. So companies don't want to promote medicine that hasn't been proved to be both safe and efficacious. If you're talking, were you referring to right to choose, right to access to medicines that are still in clinical trials? When you mentioned that? Yes. Okay. I just think that's a huge misnomer. The notion that patients have a right to get access to medicines that are in clinical trials, regardless of whether it's deemed to be they're the right patient for the right medicine at the right time. That's a false issue. The FDA has virtually never blocked a company from providing medicines to patients under those conditions, and it's something the Trump administration signed into law, but it has very little value in my opinion.
Let's go to our last two questions over here.
Hi. I wanted to pick up on the storytelling comment and also going to the individual people in any country about how to have them help tell the story. I'm someone who has worked both in investor relations, public relations, and I now have been working in patient advocacy at several different organizations. It's extremely difficult for the patient advocacy groups to reach somebody, to speak with someone, a real person, without getting into those lines where, oh, I can't talk to you about that, you have to call someone else, to submit a grant so that you can support the work of patient advocacy. I've just done 34 of them. It's hell. And having been on the other side in investor relations.
I'm sorry, can you clarify, reach someone, you mean in the industry or a patient?
Actually in the companies.
In the companies,
So there are quite often there's one person who's in the patient advocacy team, and they are doing their best. They have limited budget. The budgets compared to the commercial budget or the investor relations budget are minimal. They don't compare at all. So if you're talking about what is it that we can do so people can tell the stories better, I'm quite happy to tell the stories, would love to make it easier for us, and maybe we can help you.
Thank you.
Wasn't a question, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Sheik. I'm an independent analyst and writer. I have a political question. At Trump's last State of the Union address, he pretty much surprised everyone. He highlighted HIV. You know, his next State of the Union is coming up pretty soon. But in November, you know, in Trump fashion, you know, he went after Gilead, basically, who has the only 2 PrEP drugs on the market, and he pretty much went after his own agenda. Okay, so my question is he going to double down on HIV, or at the next State of the Union, or do you think he'll pick on something new?
Ivan, this is yours.
I don't think he even knows.
I suspect he will not be consistent. I think that, obviously, I think what you're pointing to there is...
An understatement.
You cannot, I mean, it's hypocritical to, on the one hand, advocate that we need to do more in medical innovation on HIV and provide access. At the same time, so many of your policies are completely inimical to that. So, when the president proposes that we import prices from Europe, the international price indexing, which would basically mean gigantic reductions in prices, that's the end of innovation. And he really needs only to pick up the phone and call the Secretary of HHS to enact his executive order in that regard. That could be absolutely fatal. Why in God's name would anybody invest in all of these companies knowing they're going to lose their money 9 times out of 10 if they know when they do win and they do get an FDA approval, they have no control over what the price is going to be in the marketplace? That's who would invest under that scenario? And I would argue no one.
And I'll close with this. I think that one of the big challenges with the Trump administration is that regardless of whether you're working in a Democratic or a Republican administration in the past, there's always been a process by which ideas come to light. There's always been a process by which things end up at the State of the Union, by which things end up being publicly announced. And this administration may have a process, but nobody's quite been able to figure it out. So that makes everything very unpredictable. And a lot of times it makes for a terrible public policy process.
All right. Guys, what a great debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any final comments from everybody? Jeremy?
Yeah. Tell your kids to go vote. Every single
Yes.
one of them.
Yes. So please join me in thanking our panel and panelists. So Ivan, thank you. Rue, Julie, Jim, Jeremy and Cami. Thank you all so much for spending your time with us.